We're good. All right, so today's session, I am hoping that you leave knowing how to tackle this particular issue. It's not a difficult problem to research, except for that you're now in this world of federal land, which means that you have so many sources to filter through. You really have to be good at narrowing and knowing how and where to look for certain things. So we're going to go through the last semester's 3 classes, and we're going to combine them all into one. Now, getting started, what's the first step of my research process? What do I need to do first? What?
I usually turn my computer on.
Turn your computer on. Great step. That is halfway there. Then what do you do? Yes.
Narrow down jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction's good. So we know that we are really not limited, right? So we're just though in the federal circuit. So we're looking at all circuits and we're looking at Supreme Court. Okay, and then what do I want to do? Yeah, keep going.
I believe we start with secondary.
Yes, but before I get to secondary sources, how do I get into secondary sources? What do I need to do? Go to Lexis Advanced. Yes, we are on it today. And do search terms. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Yes, search terms, right? So the first thing I really want to do is create a good search. The first initial search, really all I'm doing is I'm not trying to look beyond what says in this call of the question. I'm not looking at the record for facts. I'm not looking at the record for statute citations because it's not asking me to analyze anything outside of this particular prompt. So, looking at this particular prompt, what are some key words that you think we need to research? Fourth Amendment, yes, that's our primary area of law that governs our particular problem. Okay? Warrantless search. How'd you get to warrantless? Yes, good. That's exactly correct. I know it says without a warrant, but not all classes have gotten the without part to the warrantless. But yes, warrantless is perfect. So I can do warrant or warrantless. Now, I'm going to put in warrant, and we're going to do something to that in a second. What else? Search and seizure. Does it say search and seizure anywhere on here? Not yet. We're going to get there next week. Right now, what does it say, though? Protective sweep. That is key to this particular problem or this particular issue. You're not wrong that search and seizure is in this particular area. That's the overall governing area. However, I have protective sweep right here, and we could put in search and seizure. Protective sweep, if you get into the research and understanding the area of law, is actually under search and seizure. So we're just going to go straight to protective sweep. Anything else? I'm looking for one more good term. Yes. Yes. Lawful arrest. Or I'm just going to put in arrest. Either way. Okay, before I hit search, though, I'm going to do this. Why would I put an exclamation at the end of warrant? Yep. It gets it all, right? So warrantless, warrant, warranting, which doesn't really help me, but really what I want to do. Now, if I didn't put the exclamation mark, would it get warrants, warranting, warranted? Yes, it would. So this is only adding on words that are not plural, past tense, or future of that particular word. Warrantless it will capture, but not warrant. And it already captures warranting, warrants, when warranted. Okay. Before I hit search, is there anything else you think, and this is a misleading question, is there anything else you think we might want to include? We're good. All right, so I can put in things like search. I can put in things like police, law enforcement, but at this point, what am I trying to answer? I'm trying to really figure out whether the law permits you to do a protective sweep if a arrest did not happen prior to the sweep, right, to the search. That's really what we're trying to figure out, okay? Any questions about this before we hit search? Yes?
Did you put protective sweep in quotes?
Great question. Would I want to put protective sweep in quotes? Yes. Yeah, that is correct. No, I do not. And, well, here's why I would or would not. If I want it so that I don't get protective sweeps or swept. Okay. So do you see what I'm saying? So it would only change it in that it's going to look for it exactly as protective sweep, but it's already looking for it as a phrase. So there's no need to put in quotes because I have these connectors, the ands here. Whatever is as a phrase or words together, it automatically is going to lump them as such, and so I don't need to put quotes because it's going to do that naturally. Okay. Now, if I didn't have my ands here, then I wanted to just look for protective sweep in general, I would put quotes around it, and we will do that later. That's a good question. Any other questions? So, creating an initial search is the most important thing as far as getting started. We will use this search again later on. Let's go ahead and hit search. So I heard it earlier, but what's the next step in the research process? Jurisdiction's good. We know our jurisdiction. We have our search, and now where do we look? Secondary sources next. Okay, we don't dive into cases or look at the Constitution, etc. So I'm just going to go down and filter to secondary material. Okay. If you haven't expanded your category section, go ahead and expand category. So, actually, what's the first thing we should do? Jurisdiction. I'm going to choose multiple. So I'm going to select non-jurisdictional because that will make an impact later. Non-jurisdictional, which I always look at in every single problem, and I'm also going to look at U.S. federal. Okay? U.S. federal non-jurisdictional. What is non-jurisdictional again, just as a recap? I know we went over this last semester. Non-jurisdictional is a survey of all jurisdictions, right? So it's going to include federal, but it's also going to include state as well. So I want to include that because there's some good non-jurisdictional sources that we're going to look at. Okay? All right, but first, under my category, if I know nothing about my topic, what is the best entry point that gives me the broadest explanation and goes through everything that I need to know about a protective sweep? Say it a little bit louder. You had it. Yes, a treatise, all right? So a treatise is my first initial stopping point. What I'm getting from my secondary source is this. I want to understand my area of law, but more importantly, I want to know what are my main key cases and how do I get started on additional search terms. So to filter through, I have police civil liability. Does this look like it's kind of on point? Maybe. Let's keep going. Pretrial motions and criminal prosecutions. This is dealing with arrest and search and seizure. Maybe. Criminal constitutional law, search incident to arrest. This looks like it's dealing with my issue. To be honest, you could go to probably any of these and you could find exactly what you need. I'm going to start with this one because I like this one and I've been using it already. But any of these three are going to at least get you started and on the process of getting the main cases, understanding this particular area of law. Let's go ahead, though, and select number 3. We were having problems with internet earlier this morning, so we'll see how this goes. Okay. So, again, why do I look at a secondary source? Because it tells me everything that I need to know. So here it gives me the 4th Amendment authorizes a police officer to conduct a warrantless search, which is exactly what happened. Incident to a lawful custodial arrest. Is that what happened? No, it was not incident to a lawful custodial arrest, right? But I know that we can do this type of warrantless search, but our issue becomes then we did it prior to the arrest. So this is your main issue you're trying to figure out. Now, I'm going to go through and see, maybe there are cases that talk about not incident to prior arrest. How would I look for that within this particular document? Right here, search document. See where it says search document? We're going to put search document, and I'm going to put in quotes, not incident. If I can do quotes. Okay. Why am I putting it in quotes again? Because I want those two words together, and unless I put a connector in between them, they're going to be one or the other. Okay. So it looks like if they had made the arrest, there would be no issues, but I promise you, we'll get there. Okay, it looks like here in Preston that there was an arrest, or they were without a warrant, they didn't have an arrest, but they still made the search. So it looks like it happens, right? And here I'm going to go through and just find every single place where not incident was talked about to figure out which cases are talking about my issue. But it looks like if I go through here, cases say both, that it can happen and that it cannot happen. So why do you think that is? Depends on a situation, and more importantly, it depends on the circuit, which is why you're split up into two different sides. So there's one governing case. I'm going to show you it right now, but there's a circuit split, which means that some circuits say it's okay and some circuits say it's not. What I'm getting from this main secondary source is that what is the protective sweep? That generally it's covered, right? And then I'm going to go through and find the cases that go one way or go on the other, depending on which side of the argument that you're on. But I know by looking here, this is the main case. Where are we? It's not the Chadwick case. It is escapes me. Where are you? We'll find it. It is the Maryland v. Bowie case, and we'll see it again. Anyway, it's here if you continue to scroll down. So this is going to be a really good secondary source that gets you started, and it tells you everything that you need to know as far as getting into this area of law. Now I'm going to show you an even better secondary source. However, to save this, all I need to do is click on the folder over here. Choose GEL if you have one. I have my own special GEL folder. Yes?
It's under footnote 5.
Oh.
Trick I used, if you have an Apple computer, you use Command F. You can independently search the page for a term.
Okay.
And not mess up the search.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Now we're going to go back. Start in treatises when you know nothing, so that educates you pretty well. If I had spent more time in there, I would have gotten the Preston case, I would have gotten this Maryland case. We're going to see these again. But now I'm going to go back and look at an ALR. So remember, treatises are great because they give you a good sense of the area of law. ALRs are better because for this particular step in our research, because they give me a nice long list of cases and they break it down by issue, okay? So let's go ahead and select jurisprudence. So I'm back under category, select jurisprudence. This is also all in the handout in case you are following along on the handout. So here's why I didn't start here. Because here's this Maryland v. Bowie case, and we would have found this in our secondary source, but we know this is the case that is the landmark case for protective sweeps. This is the case that you are going to base your particular argument off of here. And the jurisdictions, notice, is this a Supreme Court case? Yes. And this is where jurisdictions split by interpreting this particular case. So now I need to figure out which ones are interpreting it one way and which ones are interpreting it another way, okay? Why I didn't start here as well is because you notice how specific is this title? super specific, right? And I didn't know that this case was a landmark case. We found that out from the treatise if I would have spent a little bit more time in it. But then also, warrantless search of the house for dangerous persons. Is this our particular issue? Yes, it is. Yes and no. So we'll go back to the fact record. Yes, if you read the record, like the officer kind of hints at, yes, we thought that there might be someone there, and that's why we kept looking through everything. So this is, in a sense, kind of what's on point for us, but the protective sweep is generally governed or allowed if there's some sort of reason, and generally it's because they're worried about someone being in there. If you read the record very closely, he says that. Okay? Have you read the record yet? Yeah? Okay, yes.
So, Marilyn, this is the control. This is the same one. I kind of lost the case with you last week.
Yeah, great point. And I should have said this from the beginning. I do a lot of these classes, and I would suggest, honestly, that you just take notes. It's sometimes easier than going through and following me because you'll lose me sometimes, and I'm more than happy to walk back. But yeah, Marilyn v. Bowie, this is our main controlling case. Okay. So I point out how specific this is because look at this one. It looks exactly the same pretty much, right? Construction and application of federal courts of the protective sweep doctrine recognized in this case. Here's the landmark case. But this one's dealing with apartment or other non-house dwelling for dangerous persons. Is this on point? No, because we aren't in an apartment or a non-house dwelling. If we were, then this would be the one that we use. So this is my kind of warning to you. If you're going to start in ALRs and this particular jurisprudence, while it's very helpful, I didn't know yet before I looked at the treatise that this would be my case, and I didn't know maybe possibly that it would be a warrantless search, and I then didn't know that it depended on the type of dwelling that they found, whether it's a vehicle, an apartment, a house, right? So that's why I don't typically start here, because you have to have a little bit more information before you dive into these. Otherwise, this is totally different than the one above. That makes sense? All right, let's go to that first one then. Come up for anyone else? Okay. So remember, going through an ALR, what I'm focusing on is having a good sense of what's out here. I'm going to read through, and pretty much you're going to get a lot of review of what happened in that prior secondary source. It's going to tell you what the protective suite is. Then if I click here, remember every single one of these footnotes takes me to my primary source. So I'm getting to my main area of law, and then I'm jumping in and finding my primary sources. Here's our main case that governs this particular issue. Now, I might spend some time going through this and understanding it, but what do I really want to do? Focus on now. Find supporting cases that answer what's my main issue here that's presenting me a problem. Do you remember? Not incident to a lawful arrest, because as we saw in that previous treatise, arrest, then a sweep, totally fine. It's where there's a sweep and then arrest that there's a lot of gray area. So that's where your crux of your issue is going to be on whether it's okay or it's not okay. Okay? So here, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did prior, not incident. Can I spell that correctly? Okay, hit search to figure out what cases are talking about whether it's okay to do a protective sweep or it's not okay to do a protective sweep. All right, we're just And here, whether protective suite is not insufficient is valid when police are executing a search warrant. Great. We're going to keep going down. And this is the main section. Depending on what side of the argument, this is all for you. Depending on if you're on the other side of the argument, where is it? Okay, sweep in general, there's a section that's valid. If I scroll down, there's a section whether or not it's invalid. Whether you have a search warrant, not incident to arrest is valid, and then again, underneath here, incident to arrest. Right. Okay, so looking here, what do I need to pay attention to specifically? Some of these cases are going to be reported and some of these cases are not going to be reported. So can I cite to an unreported case? Nope, I cannot. So you just need to make sure when you go through these particular cases that you're actually looking ones that have our specific circuits, okay? And this is where you're going to spend a lot of time going through and figuring out which cases are on point for you and which cases are not on point for you, okay? Now, at this point, I would take notes of the cases that I find here because I want to go through and find and look at them again, particularly if it's, depending on what sign I'm at, if it's on point for my particular issue. Yes, did you have a question?
Can you refresh my memory on why a case would not be reported?
Well, I'll let you take this one.
Sometimes the court doesn't want the opinion to be serving as authority for later parties. I'm not sure what reasoning they would have for that necessarily.
Yeah, I don't either. And some courts are really bad about it. Like California is one that has a million unpublished decisions, and Oregon's not so bad, but maybe they just like to write opinions, but they know that they're not actually going to be binding. Yes.
So when I followed the steps that they said, I'm going to try not to do that.
No, please, you totally can.
I don't know how to find that, so I had to go back and start over. Now I know what this is.
Yes.
How do you go back to the page you're already looking at without it doing with the next search? For some reason, it narrowed it down even further, and I didn't come up with any interesting results from that.
So I'm still on that same page. If I went back to the very top, I'm still on this particular ALR, right? I just put in my specific search terms to find where it's actually talking about what I want to narrow in on, which is not incident, right? Not incident to a lawful arrest.
So that's the very first document you clicked on,
Mm-hmm.
number 3?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. So we're still here. Okay. Yes.
So if you find something has, there's one that's U.S. v. Noriega, and it has like an actual citation, and it says unreported opinion. If they have a citation, but it's also unreported, that means it's unreported.
Well, show me where are you at?
Citation Alexis.
Star 95.
Start 95. Here?
U.S. v. Noriega.
Yeah, it says right there, it says it's an unreported opinion.
So even though it's on the it's unreported.
Yeah. And so when you look here, it will give you,
Reported by the search service, but it's not
Reported.
reported officially by the court system. So it counts as an unofficial opinion.
right. So you won't, so when you go to cite it, do you notice, like when you do cites last semester, you would have like an official reporter, like F2D or whatever. Notice that there's only a Lexus and a Westlaw site. That means that's a really good indication it is not a reported case. And if you scroll down, you'll also, should also someplace show you it is not reported. Yeah, it's unfortunate. because sometimes these are the best cases. Say exactly what you want to say.
Although notice the jurisdictional level of that case, just as an example.
Oh, yeah.
Of why it would also make sense to avoid that one anyway.
Where are we, 26?
Nicholas, what was the,
Uh,
what
so-
level was it?
Oh, it was district court,
Yeah.
Alabama,
Alabama, but.
district Alabama.
Right, and that's the other piece of it, is that usually those unreported are at the district court level, and they usually are never at that higher court level. So, yeah, you'll find that happens more than you'll find the perfect case, and it's because it's unreported. I'm joking, but that feels that way sometimes. Okay, all right. Before we move on, are there any questions? Oh, here's section 23. That's what I was looking for. Here is, if you were on the other side, that first one we went to, and I think it was under section 22. This is, in general, these are the cases that are going to be on one side of the argument, that it's valid as sleep not incident to arrest. Section 23 is going to be all the cases that are on the other side that are going to tell you that it isn't valid, that sleep pursuant to arrest. These are the two depending on which side of the issue you're on. You're either in section 23 or you're in section 22, and these are going to be the best cases to get you started, okay? But just pay attention to, it looks like 8th Circuit, we're good. Here is another unreported one. Okay. All right. Let's go into our main case that governs this particular issue. Maryland v. Bowie, 949 U.S. 325, and we're going to spend the rest of the time just trying to narrow down cases that cite to this particular issue. The other thing I want to point out, remember how I said that this is likely a circuit split? If I go through here, I'm going to notice that one side is going to have generally certain circuits on it, and the other side is going to have other circuits on it. That's a really good way to help me narrow down when I'm looking for which side of the issue I'm on to go by circuit. They're here. So 8th Circuit is going to hold it invalid. If I go up, I believe I saw the 9th Circuit or the 11th Circuit here is going to hold it valid. There's the 11th Circuit. I thought I saw 9th Circuit here. Anyway, that should give you a good sense of what's going on. Okay, let's go into Maryland v. Bowie. 949 U.S. 325. This should be the next place you start your research. So if we're going to do this methodically and really do the research for you, if I were doing the research, this is where I would go next, because I know this is my landmark case for protective sleep. I get what a protective sleep is, I get my cases, and then I go to the main case to now figure out what does this case say and how are cases updating it and applying it differently in different jurisdictions, okay? So first thing you do, read the case, right? Now we're going to go through and find my main legal issues and my main legal rules coming out of this case. This is where head notes comes into play. This should all be a refresher from last semester. What are head notes? They are the main legal rules in a list, all pulled up above so that you can quickly figure out, is my issue here, is my issue not here? If my issue isn't here, then this case isn't relevant and on point. We already know this is our main case, so obviously this is going to have tons of good rules for us, right? But how do I then link? I want to find a protective sweep is a quick and limited search of the premises. That might be an issue you could take up depending on what side you're on. So this is the definition of a protective sweep. I want to find where this appears within the opinion. How do I link into that? Yes, HN1. I click right here. It takes me directly. Here's the definition coming from this case, right? That defines, here's the first rule that I'm going to need to understand. All right, now I want to find all the other cases that say exactly this. They're updating it, and remember, I want to find cases that rely on this particular language. I'm focusing very narrowly now on just the rules of law to pull back cases that are relevant for my particular issues. So I'm going to find my main rules that all focus on my main issue coming out of that will address my issue and then go from there. So this is a protective sweep if I want to know generally what other cases or Courts have said about this. Where would I go? Say it again. Yeah. Shepherdize. How? Yes. Shepherdize, narrow by this head note. So when I click here, shepherdize, narrow by this head note, it pulls back all of the cases that have just cited this case for that issue, right? And then I'm just going to link in and follow that path. All right. Scroll down because we're going to do a couple of different things. What's the first thing I should filter to? Jurisdiction. I only care about federal courts. All right. So it takes it down to 466. Still a little too many. Now what do I want to do? What were we just talking about? I want to get rid of unreported cases, which is 272. This takes it down to 174. All right. Notice how we have our Supreme Court cases filtered first. So everything I look at the top under Supreme Court is going to be binding authority. I probably would want to start here to see how do they apply and interpret it. But if I want to see how the Arizona v. Gant case applies, head note 1, which is the first rule about protective sweeps, and click right here, head note 1, right? I just follow that breadcrumb trail to see what's the most current application of this particular rule. And this is where I start to develop a nice rule, right? I want to find more cases that say this. This is how I do that. I stick to my rule, and then I update it to see what cases have said about this. And they're all going to have a different way of applying it or interpreting it, but this is the best way to do that because I'm just sticking to my particular issue, finding more recent cases, that's what Shepard's does, and then start to build a nice case rule. And as you can see here, this is exactly that first rule, and it gives you a good indication of what's going on with what a protective sweep is, okay? Let's go back and do it one more time. There's a couple other rules that I think you should just be aware of. Okay? All right. If you just scroll down, actually I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Scroll down and see if there's any other rules you think that would be very helpful. Okay, looking. What else did you find? Yep, what else? Maybe head note 6, right? So those 3 are the ones, or maybe 4, depending on how in-depth you want to get into it, are the ones that I would start my research on. This is where my next step in going through the research process is I would find that rule. If I'm trying to explain here's the way the court should go, this is telling me that there might be unreasonable searches, but it's expanding its explanation of what the protective sweep is, what the purpose of it is. I want to find more cases that say this or give me a more current application. I'm going to shepherdize narrow by this head, right? They're all citing it. They might be citing it for negative, but they might be citing it for positive. I can do all of that by just shepherdizing by head notes, depending on which side of the issue I want to go on. Choose my jurisdiction, reported cases. And as it goes through, if I want to find cases that say the opposite of this, what should I do? Yep, if I want to find cases that all follow it, what do I do? Yep, so depending on what side of the issue you're on, use your analysis, all right? You're either going with it or you're going against it. Use these cases. So filter by analysis, filter by jurisdiction, and then filter by reported, unreported. Okay? That's going to be your most helpful tool of finding more on-point cases. All right, after you've done that, so if I really were doing the research, I still would be in this particular case because I'm going to show you one more thing that's helpful. Okay. I totally lost track of time. Okay, good. Over here, under the Shepherd's report, I'm going to, I don't know if I can go down. All right. If you scroll down, do you see where this is right here about this document? At the very underneath the Shepherd's report is the about this document, and I'm projecting, and it does not want to let me expand it. So if you expand it, it should look like this. So on the far right-hand side, sorry, I'm right in your way. Under about this document, you're going to go under topic summaries, and then, let's see. At the very bottom of that is legal issue trail. Go ahead and select legal issue trail. This is also the last thing on the handout. So if you forget how to do this, the instructions are also on the handout. Legal issue trail, and then activate passages. Do you find it? Okay, cool. So what this is doing is while above I found those like 7 different rules, this is everywhere else in the case that the courts in my Shepherd's report have cited to. So if I want to find cases that specifically talk about, let's see, there's a test, whether or not it's reasonable without a warrant issued on probable cause, and I want to find cases that are particularly talking about this public interest requirement, but this isn't particularly a rule. I'm going to click on this particular box, and then it just basically pulls the Shepherd's report based on that language. So now I have cases, when it pulls up my report, that are just citing this text. So I have 35 cases, and this is an easier way than going through the Shepherd's report and trying to figure out, did they talk about not incident, did they talk about this particular language? When I select activate these passages, it highlights all of the places in the case that the courts have looked at and relied upon, okay, and are updating. So this is an easier way, again, to find more on-point cases because I'm just going by the language of the courts as opposed to shepherdizing and trying to figure out what's on point and what isn't from that particular report, okay? Those are my 2 easiest ways to find on-point cases. After I go through this, if I still haven't found some of these cases, I might go back to that ALR and pull some of those cases. The likelihood that during this process where you're updating, expanding those, that you're going to see some of those same cases. I know you'll see Preston from here. I know that you'll see a lot of those other cases from the ALR. As you go through this process, it's pretty strong. But if I haven't seen those yet, this is the point where I would go back and start reading them and making sure that I'm capturing it all, right? That's the point of this particular problem that's hardest. Your universe is so big, it's when do you stop, right? At what point do you say, okay, we're done? And we'll talk more about that next week. But this should at least get you started so you have a really good grasp of here's my particular issue, here's what I need to focus on, my ALR, my treatise is at least going to give me a good understanding of where to get started, and then start from here and branch off depending on which side of the issue you are on. Okay. All right, any questions? Does it seem doable? We'll find out because I will see you next week. Yes. Oh, yes. Great. There was a good question about that here. Let's go down. Something that you do throughout your research process, and it's just going to become innate. You don't really even have to pay attention too closely after a certain point, like, is this good law? Is this not good law? Initially, if I look here, can I cite this case without any issues? Yes or no? Probably, right? There's no red stop sign. What I need to pay attention to and what you're going to focus more specifically on for this particular problem is distinguished by cases by your rule, by your head note, right? Those are what's going to be helpful for me by saying, is this going or not? When I do a general Shepherd's analysis, I just want to know, some cases are given a cautionary analysis, I might distinguish it. Those are the cases that are saying, here's the facts in the Maryland case, but here's our more updated Maryland case or distinguished cases here, and this is how we're applying them differently. It's not changing that you can't cite this particular case, we're just applying it differently. For your purposes, that's very helpful because then it gives you some part of the case that is going to go in and really analyze how to apply the facts in Maryland differently, and that can be very helpful depending on what side of the argument you're on, right? But generally, we don't have an issue updating this or having cite this. Where we come into problems is when we find the the red stop sign. So 22 F3D, and then this probably, I know this is a review for everyone, but in case you missed this class last semester, if I get a red stop sign, can I cite that case? Maybe. Likely yes. How would I know if I can't cite this particular case? What do I need to do? Yep. Yes. So let's say that I find this case and it's in my ALR or my treatise and it's exactly what I want to say, right? So but it has the red stop sign. That should not stop you. Really what I want to do is read through this pinpoint page right here, 924, to figure out which part of Howe's overrules or overturns Lee, and I can't cite that particular piece of Lee. All right? The rest of Lee, you're good. Yes?
What's the significance of the discussion? Little 40 lines. Is that relevant or not?
It's an algorithm that basically is saying this is how much this case is discussed in the other case. I feel like that is a very poor thing to rely on because just because it's discussed a lot doesn't mean it's having your discussion. So I tend to tell students to stay away from that. Sometimes if you, like in your world right now where you have 150 cases, sometimes that can be helpful to find the cases that are really talking about your topic. But for generally, it's a filtering tool that I rarely use except for maybe in this circumstance. Any other questions? Okay. Yes. Either one.
Can you find the same case by searching our search from the Fourth Amendment?
Yes, you can. You'd have to do a lot of filtering. But yeah, you could start there. No problem.
Just because we are limiting our search by words.
Yeah, so you could do it by the Fourth Amendment clause, but then you would have to put in protective sweep, basically everything that we did. So, I mean, if you were, let's translate that to a statute. You could do the exact same thing. Let's say this was actually based out of a statute instead of the Fourth Amendment, where we'd still look at cases to interpret the statute. We'd get more of a sense of what that specific statute says, but yeah, it's there. Go from this treatise. It will be a lot easier. Yeah.
So I'm assuming something like an audience setting is going to work. Like, how do we know what things to search for necessarily? How do we ever start with an audience setting?
No, and to be honest, I didn't do that either last night. But as I got through the research and I started to look at, okay, well, wait a minute. The Fourth Amendment says that it has to be after arrest. This says it's not. That's going to be an issue. And as you read through, and that's also why you start in a secondary source, because if I hadn't read, I just saved you guys a lot of time. I'm not going to lie. Because I did the research, I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't put not incident in my first initial search. I put, let's see, Fourth Amendment, search, warrantless. I knew it was warrantless because without a warrant, and then a protective sweep. But I didn't include not incident.
Those terms typically be used by all codes, so if
And if you do, you'll find it in the secondary source. Those secondary sources are really helpful to find terms of art. So when you start to read through them, you'll notice like, okay, this is, it's either saying this or it's not saying this. This is the law, but it looks like there might be exceptions, and I'm finding that as I start to read through it. And that's really why you start a secondary source, to educate yourself. And that's what I did last night. Figured out, okay, this is not an issue, or this is my main issue, because I wasn't, not incident was not on my radar.
The secondary sources are collecting the language from the primary authorities, and so that way they give you a better sense of here's what matters from them versus taking each individual primary authority and trying to cobble them together.
Yes.
Okay, so after, so when you typed in not incident, how did you get past that? What was your next step after not incident? We have like, you know, it has 4 results within the treaty, or at least my mission.
In
So
the
from there, did you just go back to the search page, or did you put more stuff inside of the treaty, the original treaty?
So are you talking about the first treatise before I went to the ALR?
Yes.
The first treatise, I knew that I wanted to find a treatise, but I also knew, and this is probably, I should have said this earlier, I knew that with a federal problem, an ALR is sometimes very helpful because it lays out my jurisdictions for me and gives me a nice list of cases. So even though I always start with a treatise every single time to get a general sense of the idea, I always also check an ALR because that's generally my jumping off point for getting into more specific things about in that federal area.
So you went back to the search and search for ALR.
Yep. Yep. So I start with a treatise, so I understood exactly what was going on, and that led me to my main case, so then I could figure out, okay, when I look at my LRs, that case is on point. I know that this is the protective sweep case. So it's just kind of like that progression of research of, sorry, I should have explained that a little bit better, but yeah, that's my thought process behind going from treatise to an ALR, particularly for a federal problem. And I'm doing that for every single LRW problem that I've done so far this semester. I'm doing both. And that's specific to between the difference between researching a federal problem versus researching a state problem. So a state problem, I could still probably just stay in that treatise and I'd have a good sense of it. I might go to an ALR, I might not. But for a federal, because your universe is so large and you're not limited to one circuit, I really want to make sure that I can get a nice list of cases. Because you just have so many options in the federal when you have not just 1 or 2 circuits. When you have everything, like you really just need, here are the best cases for this particular issue. Okay. Any other questions I can answer? Yes?
This might be more specific. If you have something like you find a Supreme Court case that's talking about warrantless searches of a vehicle.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a circuit court case that's talking about warrantless searches of a home. Is it better to go with something that's more similar to your specific case? The incidents that are happening in yours, or is it better just to go out to the
Supreme Court? So here's the interesting part, and you'll figure this out by reading through the treatises too. Law is different from a vehicle to a home. So yes, in that particular scenario, yes, because it's very fact specific. There's different rules that apply, plain view and all that good stuff that you'll get into for a vehicle. Which is why if we were to go back, you would see that there's ALRs specifically that are just for a vehicle versus the apartment versus the home. It's very detailed. Any other questions? But in general, let's compare apples to apples. Let's say that you had a Supreme Court that was about, I guess that's very obvious, then you would just use the Supreme Court case. Trying to think of another way of when you wouldn't. But in that particular scenario, it's so specific, this particular issue, that it does matter. All right, anything else you can think of? Okay, so next week, what we'll go through is any questions that you come up against with this particular problem, and then we're gonna start the next problem. But honestly, the process is exactly the same. Like you should be able to take this format and just dive into the next problem. You should be able to look for a treatise, then an ALR, go then and find your main case that governs that particular issue, and and jump off from there. It's exactly the same process. Okay, thanks you guys. Have a good weekend.
Alright, so I have the last most recent homework you can pick up from me on your way out. Hit the ground running with your